Facebook Live, where I'm going to talk about that inner critic or the negative self talk that we can all have inside us, and why it's important that we move away from that negative self talk, that inner critic that can be quite harsh, quite angry sometimes with ourselves, and it's important that we move away from it, not to keep reinforcing that negative bias, but to try and move away from it. So let's get on with it. So, why do we allow that inner critic such free reign? I suppose would be one question we could ask ourselves. And we have to also ask ourselves, this is the longest relationship we're ever going to have, is with ourselves. And it should be the most important relationship we ever have, is the one, with ourselves. So then that begs the question, how important would a relationship be to you if it lasted this long as the one you have with yourself? And most people would probably say, well, very important. It is a really important relationship. And if we treated other people the same way, or we spoke in the same way to other people as we do to ourselves, and I don't think it would last as long as the relationship that we have with ourselves would. It probably wouldn't last very long in some cases, because we want to be treated with respect. We want to work on it. We want to work on having a positive relationship with ourselves and a supportive one. And that's what we want out of a relationship. So we really should be giving that to ourselves. But the inner critic doesn't tend to be very supportive at times. It doesn't tend to be very positive. It can actually be very harsh, as I said, and angry too. And that can be based out of fear, and other reasons. So we have to look at that. We have to examine that. We have to examine the negative self talk, because it is a very common problem for most people. And it can cause all sorts of problems for us, for our mental health and our physical health. It's not just a mental issue when you're talking to yourself and you're talking yourself out of doing something, or you're talking yourself down in any way. It's not just causing you to have mental health issues, but it can cause you to have physical health issues as well, and issues with then subsequent, relationships around you, to everybody else that's around you. So why do we? Why are we giving that inner critic that such free reign? And one way to kind of look at that and say, well, what's going on for me here, is to take that step back and to actually stop and say, okay, well, what's going on for me? What is it actually? What's that inner critic trying to actually tell me? Because that's what you need to do if you want to help yourself. If you want to, examine, a step back and change it, and change that inner critic and how you talk to yourself, and become more supportive towards yourself, then you do have to step back and actually examine, well, what is that critic trying to tell me? Why is it always so angry? Why is it always so fearful? Why is it always putting me down? Why is it always talking me into doing things I want to say no to? By understanding this cognitive distortion, and there can be a lot of them, and I've talked about them before. All that procrastination and perfectionism and all or nothing thinking, and there's a whole load of them, a whole load more of them. But when we start to look at that and understand them, then we can start to change them. We can really work on changing them. So to go back to the original question, why do we let it, reign supreme, if you like? Why do we let that inner critic reign supreme? An awful lot of the time, it can stem from our childhood. It's learned behaviours. It's conditioning that we picked up and adopted, particularly around particular cognitive distortions. We kind of picked it up during childhood. Now, that's not to say it's always to do with our childhood. We always tend to say, oh, look at the childhood and let's blame the childhood. No, it can be a more recent acquisition, particularly if you've been through a bad experience with somebody else, or a bad experience in work. So it could be through, another negative family member, negative people. I've talked about negative people before. It could be a friend that's, has issues, that you've recently met, or you met and you had a very bad experience with this so-called friend Again, a neighbour, hassle from the neighbours, it can happen to anybody. Again, putting you down. You got a new partner maybe, and they were very derogative towards you. They certainly weren't, supportive. There was trust issues, etc., in that relationship. Again, you can have picked up negative cognitive distortions there too, or in the workplace. And I've talked about toxic workplaces, and how bad that can be for mental and physical health. So if that is an issue for you, then go and check that video out. Because I do talk about leaving and how you can do so safely. And I've also talked about domestic violence a number of times and how you can also leave safely there. But what are cognitive distortions? Like, what are they? They're actually a bias. That's what they are. They put a negative bias in for most of when we think of cognitive distortions, we think of negative ones. So it's a negative perspective. It's an irrational thought, irrational belief, that we pick up. And an awful lot of times, I don't have that. That's what you're talking about. I don't have anything like that. An awful lot of the time, we can be reinforcing these with ourselves, and we do reinforce them. Through our thinking, our emotions, and our subsequent reactions, our behaviours. So we can be reinforcing them with ourselves and with others, but they can also be very subtle, and an awful lot of the time we mightn't even notice that they're actually there and that they are actually controlling us in our day-to-day life. And if they are left unchecked, then they do have a tendency to run amok. And so this is what I'm talking about, that inner critic, that lead to those behaviours and those ways of patterns of thinking and believing that actually give us a false sense or an inaccurate picture of our life, and other people around us. And that can be very scary to actually stop and think about that your own brain can fool you. As I said, these thought patterns can really create a negative bias, and we can default to that negative bias, and perspective about ourselves, about other people, and about the world we have around us. So how does that impact us? How does that then go on to impact us, this negative inner criticism, or cognitive distortion? How does that impact our well-being? It saps our sense of control. An awful lot of time, if you look at, even take something like perfectionism, or people pleasing, or any sort of controlling behaviors, we're actually trying to control what's going on, but in fact you're actually working against yourself. So you're actually working against this sense of control. You're giving yourself a false sense of control over your life. It can rob you of participating in our day-to-day life because you're so fearful, or you're so angry, etc. It increases your chances then of coronary heart disease, suppresses the immune system, which is not good. You can be feeling quite miserable, feeling angry, but you can also go down into a very downward spiral. It can trigger a downward spiral, and therefore trigger depression and anxiety and more stress, and it will keep you very stressed, and it can keep you trapped. As I said in the introduction to this video, in the post, it does keep you trapped, and it'll keep you trapped for longer, because you think your behavior is normal. You'll think that I should be doing this, I have to be doing this. And it can be, a very destructive habit then as a result that we get into. Because we're not thinking clearly as well. We're not making good decisions, particularly for ourselves. We're constantly reacting instead of being, taking a step back and being proactive. And then day-to-day life can feel too much. Our sleep patterns get disrupted, etc. And all of that is quite common for people to fall into. And again, the longer it goes, as I said, the longer it's left unchecked, the worse and worse and worse it can get. But it's not, all is not lost. we can begin to recognize that critic. We can begin to recognize what's going on, who is it, who's trying to give me a message here, and modify it and then change these faulty perceptions, and it can be strengthened by our own self-compassion, and that's really one of the points I want to make in this video in particular, and in the blog, was all about compassion. And compassion is a universal virtue. Every culture has it. It's this, most people would actually say it's actually essential for us to have compassion for ourselves. We think of compassion and having it for other people, but it's essential that we also have it for ourselves. Now, compassion isn't going to solve the world problems. It's not going to solve your problem, the ups and downs of natural life. But what happens is, when we have compassion for ourselves and a more healthier compassion for others, then we can deal with difficulties easier. It makes things much easier to deal with. And as I said, we can, we get that ability to step back and be more proactive when we react, instead of just being reactive all the time. So our actions are more proactive, and they come from a healthier base. And then we can start to enjoy life and to celebrate our successes better. We can see that we all make mistakes, and we don't continue to beat ourselves up over it. We become more open-minded and tolerant of ourselves and others. So essentially, what's happening there with compassion is it's actually rewiring your brain, and it rewires quite a number of regions in the brain. That involves empathy, obviously, compassion. We're talking about compassion here. Understanding, again, pretty much an obvious one there, you might say. But it also helps, to regulate our emotions better. We're better at regulating our emotions as a result, and we're also detouring away from that negative bias that we can be prone to, into allowing ourselves sometimes to accept and have more positive emotions, that things are brighter. We can look on the brighter side of life, that this is just a moment in time and it will pass, and we can survive this. So in the blog then I talk about tips that we can. I give you 5 tips for helping to cultivate this this compassion for yourself. The only caveat I'd say here is, if you are already feeling very stressed, burnt out, anxious, if you feel depression, I would recommend then that you go and you talk to a professional. You need to stop off, talk to your doctor in particular about the physical aspects of it, but you do need to talk to somebody like me about about the mental health aspects of it, so you can get a 2-prong support, because you really do need a good strong support system if you are feeling unwell in that way. So I'm going to start with the usual caveat. First, always talk about it, your self-care. You have to start doing self-care, the basics. These are going to help build your self-compassion, but they're also going to help quieten down the inner critic. Odds are that if you have a very negative inner critic, it's a very harsh one, you're not doing basic self-care. You're not doing that. You're not taking care of yourself. And you're not setting a clear boundary with yourself and others. So when we do take care of ourselves, it actually sets that a clear statement out there to the world and says, no, I matter. I'm going to look after myself. Then I'll be much healthier, and I can come from a proactive place and help other people. And that's why I harp on, because the basics, what I consider the very basics, and I've done video after video on this, they're the foundations of most people's lives, the basic needs. Food and water and shelter, and feeling safe. It really comes down to the basics, and that's what I'm talking about, getting your basic self-care right. And meditation, I would include meditation and journaling in there. They're really important to help you step back and really examine what's going on in my head. Because as I said, that inner critic can be very subtle, and we might know what what they're actually saying. They might know that they're in the driver's seat and not us. The second thing I'd say to you is healthy boundaries. I've been talking about, I did a couple of videos there earlier about a few weeks ago on boundaries and setting boundaries and the types of boundaries that you want and you need in your life. Again, and as I said, if you have a very negative self talk, that inner critic is running riot, the boundaries are likely to be skewed. Your boundaries with yourself are skewed, your boundaries with other people are skewed, and therefore your the relationship boundaries are skewed. So, you know, you really need to have strong boundaries in order to get away from this negative self talk, to get away from the consequences of that behaviour, of having negative self talk like perfectionism, like procrastination, like all or nothing thinking, like people pleasing, etc. You really need to start setting boundaries with yourself and others, and they have to be healthy boundaries. You know, sorry. So your personal boundaries are based on your own values, your own morals. I'll talk about core beliefs. I'm going to talk about core beliefs next week, and how important it is to recognize if you have negative core beliefs. And this all feeds into your boundaries and your interactions on a daily basis with yourself and others. Um, because your boundaries involve you participating in your life. So who will I participate with? Who will I won't participate with? Um, and learning to say no. This is all self-compassion. Learning how to say no when you need to say no. And that's very difficult for people to do. And I've done a video on this. But saying no even to yourself sometimes, and sometimes we do have to do that, step up, is a form of self compassion. And your inner critic, in general, if it's skewed, if it is very negative, will be pushing you away from saying no. It will be pushing you towards that people pleasing, the perfectionism, the procrastination. So, this could be a vital first step for you in self compassion, but also setting boundaries, is to learn to say no. And as I've said before, having a healthy boundaries is very empowering for yourself. Number three, as I said, part of what I consider, your foundations of self care, but is to practice some sort of meditation. It doesn't have to be, a lengthy meditation. There's a huge array of meditations out there. I've linked to a number of free podcasts that you can sit down and listen to. They range from 3 minutes all the way up to about 15 to 20 minutes in length. So you have options there. You can, of course, incorporate something like yoga or Tai Chi, walking meditations. People think you have to sit all the time to do meditation. You don't. You can get up and walk around. Make sure you keep your eyes open. It doesn't matter what type of meditation you do, but what this does when we meditate is it allows us to start seeing the patterns, to take that mental step back and to listen to what is being said. What is that inner critic saying to me? And then, as I said, it allows us then to examine it, and that's what my fourth tip is to practice forgiveness, self-forgiveness. So when we can see that we're being so critical towards ourselves, when we slow down, when we can slow it down, we can actually see, yep, I'm caught up in a spiral here. I'm being very self-critical. Now it's time for me to stop doing that. To say, okay, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm doing. Now I'm going to, be forgiving towards myself, accepting myself, and maybe you have to reach out for help, because you can't get out of the spiral. Maybe you need to, take up some other self-help tips, as I said, your basics of self-care, your meditation. You can do journaling as well. Journaling would be a step I would add to the meditation. So, when we start noticing that inner critic, Now the next step would be say, okay, I accept you, I forgive you for doing this. It's okay. I'm forgiving myself for what I'm doing to myself. Stop punishing yourself for those past mistakes and getting caught up in that. Oh, I was dreadful. I'm terrible. I'm a horrible person. Stop getting caught up in that, because you can actually stop. You can stop. You can use an acronym called STOP, and I've talked about this before, where you just actually tell yourself, no, stop. And you stop, you take a breath, and then you observe. Meditation is going to help you do that observation. And then you can write down as well as part of it, what's really going on. Am I afraid? Am I angry? Is somebody pushing my buttons? Really do it. And then the last one is P, which is to proceed proactively. We can proceed then with what would be more healthier choice for me, instead of defaulting to what the inner critic is telling me to do, which would be maybe, people please, or don't say no to this person, or perfectionist mode, or whatever it is, or procrastinate, whatever it is. So if you can just slow it down and get in there with some self acceptance, it does help you to become more gentler with yourself. And to recognize, okay, I've been putting myself down up to now. Now I'm going to stop, and that's okay. I've done it in the past, but now I'm going to stop. And to forgive yourself. So it's part of a forgiveness strategy. And I've also talked about deleting negative people, because it's very hard to, build self-compassion for yourself, self-forgiveness, self-acceptance, if all you're surrounded by are these negative people. So we really need, and tip 5 would be to build a support system, a positive support system, people that support us. This should be part of your foundation as well. Some people will fill different roles for you. They could include informational support or resources that you might need, and how you could access those supports. It could include professional support, like your GP or a therapist. If you're in school or college, it could be or one of your children is. You could be, get information and resources there. Your church, if you attend. Anybody else there that could offer you professional support. But it can also be a strong support system of a friend, positive friend, and family. These are people around you that you should be supporting yourself. It really, really is important, if you're going to do this work of detaching from that negative critic and changing how you're thinking and rewire your brain, that you start filling your life with positive people and positive supportive people that can give you what you need. As I said, it's not just we think of positive supportive people as being there for us, a friend or something like that, but it's not. It's informational, it's tangible support they can give you. It's resources. So we have to expand that, and I did do a whole video on that, so do check it out. The other aspect of that is, when we do support or surround ourselves with this kind of support, we actually see the kind of things we need modelled. So that self-compassion, the love, the kindness, the self-forgiveness is all modelled around you, because these people will be healthy and they will model exactly what you need to see. And therefore you're more likely then to model that then in yourself. And model that, maybe if you have children, to model it for them. So that's it for this week. Next week, as I said, I'm going to look at core beliefs, which will be part of your boundaries, but also would be part of and feeding this inner critic. It's a kind of a layer below. So I'll be looking at that next week. If you can't wait for the video, you can check out the blog on Monday, and I'll see you then. Thank you all for those who watch live. Thank you to those that watch in replay. I know an awful lot of people watch here and on YouTube. And so I will leave it there. Don't forget, there are links to other blogs, videos, podcasts in the original post, and I'm going to leave it in the description below for you. I'll see you then.